A police officer sees a young black boy kneeling beside a gravestone, so he decides to investigate. After talking to the boy, the officer is shocked to discover the situation that led to this moment. Officer Jack Simmons adjusted his patrol hat as he leaned against the hood of his cruiser, watching the boy from a distance. It was his fourth day in a row seeing the kid there, always around the same time after school. Jack knew the boy's routine by now, arriving with his school backpack slung over one shoulder, heading straight to the same grave and kneeling down beside it. He'd stay there talking quietly, sometimes tracing the letters on the headstone with his small fingers. Jack hadn't approached him yet, hadn't figured out what to say to a kid talking to a grave. Today, though, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the boy's shoulders drooped more than usual, or the way he seemed to cling to his words as if he were desperately trying to hold on to something slipping away. Jack sighed, pushing off the car and walking over. As he got closer, he noticed the boy's face, a mix of sorrow and a kind of calm that seemed too old for his years. The kid glanced up, wide eyes locking onto Jack's badge, then his face. "Hey there," Jack said gently, crouching down so he wasn't towering over the boy. "You come here often?" The boy nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every day." Jack took a breath, searching for the right words. You talking to someone?" The boy looked back at the grave, his small fingers tracing the engraved name on the headstone. Sarah Turner. "My mom. She likes it when I visit." Jack's chest tightened. "Your mom, huh? Is she buried here?" The boy didn't look up, just nodded. "She's right here. I tell her about school and stuff." His voice cracked a little on the last word, but he didn't cry. Jack sat back on his heels, watching the kid's steady hand tracing the name. "I'm sorry, kid. That's tough." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Jack felt like he was intruding, but something in the boy's composure held him there. He was too calm, too put together for an 8-year-old. Jack had seen that kind of look before, in adults who'd been through hell and come out the other side scarred but standing. "What's your name?" Jack asked, finally breaking the quiet. "Ben." The boy finally looked up, meeting Jack's gaze. His eyes were a deep brown, filled with a kind of resigned acceptance that didn't belong in a child. "Ben," Jack repeated, nodding. "I'm Jack. I'm a police officer. Is there someone here with you? A grown-up, maybe?" Ben shook his head. "No. Grandma and Grandpa are home. They don't like coming here. It's too sad for them." "Yeah, I get that." Jack rubbed the back of his neck, unsure how to continue. "They know you're here, though, right?" "They know." Ben's voice was steady, but Jack sensed a sadness he couldn't quite place. "They say I shouldn't come so much, but she gets lonely." Jack didn't know how to respond to that. He looked around the cemetery, the fading light casting a golden glow over the gravestones. It was peaceful here in a way, but no place for a kid to spend his afternoons, no matter the reason. "Listen, Ben," Jack said gently. "It's okay to miss her, and it's okay to come here and talk to her, but you shouldn't be here alone. It's not safe." Ben just nodded, like he'd heard it all before. "Do you live close by?" Jack asked, glancing at the backpack beside Ben. "Not far," Ben said. "Just over by the old mill." Jack knew the area. Small houses, some in better shape than others. If Ben's grandparents lived there, they probably didn't have much. He hesitated, then stood, extending a hand to Ben. "How about I give you a ride home, just to make sure you get there safe?" Ben looked up at him, considering, then nodded slowly. He stood, picking up his backpack, and slipped his small hand into Jack's larger one. Jack led him to the cruiser, opening the passenger door and helping Ben in. As they drove, Jack glanced over at the boy who was staring out the window, his face expressionless. "You want to tell me about your mom?" Jack asked quietly. Ben was silent for a moment, then spoke, his voice soft. "She was really nice. She used to sing to me before bed, and she made the best pancakes on Saturdays." He paused, his hand fiddling with the strap of his backpack. "She said she'd always be here, but she's not." Jack's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Sometimes things happen that aren't fair, Ben, and it hurts. But it doesn't mean she's not with you. Not really." Ben turned to look at him, eyes searching Jack's face. "Do you believe in that? That people don't really go away?" Jack hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do." They pulled up to a small, weathered house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Jack parked and got out, walking around to open Ben's door. Ben slipped out, looking up at Jack with something like gratitude. "Thanks, Officer Jack," he said quietly. "Anytime, Ben," Jack replied. "You take care, okay? And if you ever need to talk, you know where to find me." Ben nodded, then turned and walked up the path to the house. Jack watched him go, feeling a strange mix of sadness and something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. As he got back in his cruiser and drove away, Jack glanced in the rearview mirror, watching the little boy standing on the porch, looking after him until he turned the corner and disappeared from sight. That night, As Jack lay in bed, he couldn't shake the image of Ben kneeling by his mother's grave, talking to her as if she were still alive. And for the first time in years, Jack found himself thinking about his own family, the wife and child he'd lost. The grief he'd buried so deep it almost felt like it wasn't his anymore. Almost. He rolled over, staring at the ceiling, and wondered what he was getting himself into. The next afternoon, Jack stood on the front porch of a small, weather-beaten house. He took a deep breath before knocking, his gaze drifting over the chipped paint and sagging gutters. He'd seen homes like this before, where age and time had taken their toll, and maintenance was a luxury, not a priority. He could hear muffled voices inside, followed by the shuffling of feet. The door creaked open, and Jack found himself looking into the tired, wary eyes of an elderly woman. "Mrs. Turner?" he asked, showing his badge. "I'm Officer Jack Simmons. We met briefly the other day." Eleanor Turner nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Yes, I remember. You brought Ben home." Her voice was soft, but held a hint of wariness. Jack offered a small, reassuring smile. "I was just checking in, making sure everything's all right. May I come in?" Eleanor hesitated, glancing back into the house. "I suppose. It's not much, but you're welcome to sit." The living room was small and cluttered but clean. An old floral couch took up most of the space, surrounded by a mix of mismatched furniture. Family photos lined the walls, and Jack noticed one of a younger woman with a kind smile holding a baby. Ben and his mother, Sarah, he guessed. "Please sit," Eleanor said, gesturing to the couch. "Can I get you some tea or coffee?" "No, thank you, ma'am," Jack replied, sitting down. "I just wanted to talk about Ben." Eleanor's face softened at the mention of her grandson. She sank into an armchair opposite him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "He's been through a lot," she said quietly. "We all have." Jack nodded. "I understand. I see him at the cemetery often, and I just want to make sure he's okay. It's not easy for a kid his age to go through something like this." Eleanor looked down, her fingers twisting a handkerchief nervously. "He loved his mother more than anything. Losing her," her voice trailed off, and she took a deep breath before continuing. "I don't think he really understands what happened. One minute she was here, and the next she was gone. It's like he's waiting for her to come back." Jack's chest tightened. He could picture Ben's small, determined figure kneeling by the grave, talking as if his mother were just invisible, not gone. "He told me he visits her every day," Jack said gently. "Does he talk to you and Mr. Turner about how he's feeling?" Eleanor shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "No, he doesn't say much. Just goes to school, comes home, and then the cemetery. We try to talk to him, but he just shuts down. I think he's afraid we'll get upset if he brings her up." Jack leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. "It's important for him to have someone to talk to. Losing a parent is hard enough, but feeling like you can't talk about it makes it even worse." Eleanor nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes. "I know, but we're doing our best. It's just so hard." Her voice broke and she turned away, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Just then, heavy footsteps echoed from the back of the house, and a gruff voice called out, "Who's that you're talking to, Eleanor?" A moment later, an older man appeared in the doorway, his posture stiff, his face lined with age and fatigue. He glared at Jack with a mix of suspicion and defiance. "What's this about?" he demanded, his tone brusque. "Frank, this is Officer Simmons," Eleanor said quickly, standing. "He's the one who brought Ben home the other day." "I remember," Frank said, crossing his arms. "What do you want now? We're not in any trouble, are we?" Jack shook his head. "No trouble, Mr. Turner. I'm just here to talk about Ben. I'm concerned about how he's coping with everything. He spends a lot of time at the cemetery and you think that's a problem?" Frank interrupted, his voice rising. "The boy lost his mother. You think he's not supposed to miss her?" Jack stayed calm, meeting Frank's angry gaze. "I think it's natural for him to grieve, but he's only 8. He needs support, someone he can talk to." Frank's eyes narrowed. "We're doing just fine, officer. He's our grandson and we'll take care of him. We don't need anyone else sticking their nose in our business." "Frank, please," Eleanor pleaded softly, placing a hand on her husband's arm. "He's just trying to help." "I don't need a cop telling me how to raise my grandson," Frank snapped, shaking off her hand. He turned back to Jack, his voice hard. "I know what you're thinking, officer. That we're too old, too worn out to take care of him, but he's our family. We're not letting anyone take him away from us." Jack stood, keeping his tone measured and calm. "I'm not trying to take him away, Mr. Turner. I just want to make sure he's okay. If you need any help, resources, counseling, anything, I can connect you with the right people." Frank scoffed, his face flushed with anger. "We don't need your help. We don't need charity." Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "Frank, please, just listen." But Frank shook his head, his voice firm. "No, Eleanor, we can do this ourselves." Jack could see the strain in Frank's posture, the stubbornness mixed with fear. He didn't want to push, but he couldn't just walk away either. "If you change your mind," he said, pulling a card from his pocket and placing it on the coffee table, "you can call me anytime. I mean that." Frank's gaze dropped to the card, then back to Jack, his expression unreadable. He said nothing as Jack turned to Eleanor, offering a small, respectful nod. "Thank you for talking with me, Mrs. Turner." Eleanor smiled weakly. "Thank you, Officer Simmons." As Jack left the house, he felt a mix of frustration and helplessness. Ben's grandparents were clearly struggling, but pride and fear were keeping them from accepting help. Jack climbed into his cruiser and took a moment to collect his thoughts. He glanced back at the house, feeling the weight of what he'd just seen. The Turners were trying their best, but it wasn't enough. Ben needed more than they could give right now. Jack wasn't sure what he could do, but he knew he couldn't just walk away. Not this time. He started the car and drove off, his mind churning with thoughts of the little boy who visited a grave every day, hoping for something he couldn't have. Jack knew that feeling too well, and the thought of Ben facing it alone was something he couldn't ignore. As he headed back to the station, he resolved to keep checking in on the family, whether they liked it or not. Ben needed someone looking out for him. And maybe, Jack thought, as he glanced at the photos of his own family tucked in his visor, he needed that too. Jack parked his cruiser on the gravel road just outside the cemetery. He watched as Ben walked through the gate, his small frame almost swallowed by the oversized blue hoodie. It was the same routine. School backpack over one shoulder, sneakers dragging through the leaves, heading straight for his mother's grave. Jack leaned back in his seat, sighing. He'd told himself he was just keeping an eye on things, but he knew it was more than that. He needed to see the kid, needed to be sure he was okay. Ben reached the grave and knelt, his head bowed as if in prayer. Jack stepped out of the car and slowly made his way over, his boots crunching on the gravel path. When he got closer, Ben glanced up, his expression calm but distant. "Hey, Ben," Jack said quietly, sitting down on the grass a few feet away. "How was school today?" Ben shrugged. "Okay, I guess. We had a test." Jack raised an eyebrow. "A test? How'd you do?" "I don't know." Ben fiddled with the zipper of his backpack, avoiding Jack's eyes. "I didn't finish." Jack frowned. "Why not?" Ben shrugged again, a little jerk of his shoulders. "I don't know. I just couldn't think." Jack nodded, letting the silence settle between them. He knew better than to push. "I get it," he said softly. "Sometimes it's hard to focus on stuff like that." Ben looked at him, his eyes dark and serious. "Did you ever lose someone?" Jack's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected that. He glanced at the grave, then back at Ben, the words sticking in his throat. "Yeah," he finally said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I did." Ben's gaze didn't waver. "Who?" Jack hesitated, the memories rushing back like a flood. His wife, her laughter, the way her eyes sparkled when she told him she was pregnant, the accident, the hospital, the emptiness that followed. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "My wife," he said slowly, "and our baby." Ben's eyes widened, and he looked away, staring at the ground. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Jack shook his head, trying to smile. "It's okay, Ben. It was a long time ago." Ben was silent for a moment. Then he looked up again, his brow furrowed. "Did you miss her? A lot?" Jack felt his chest tighten. "Every day." Ben's voice was small, almost afraid. "Does it get better?" Jack swallowed, unsure how to answer. He thought about all the years he'd spent burying his grief, pretending it didn't hurt, trying to move on. But then he thought about the nights when the emptiness would swallow him whole, the days when he couldn't even bring himself to look at the pictures on the mantel. "I don't know," he said honestly. "It changes, I guess. It doesn't hurt as much, but you still miss them." Ben nodded slowly, as if processing Jack's words. "I miss Mom," he said finally. "A lot. I talk to her, but she doesn't talk back." Jack's heart ached for the boy. "She's listening, Ben." "I'm sure she is." Ben looked up at him, eyes wide and hopeful. "You think so?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, I do." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Jack could feel the weight of his own grief, the memories he'd tried so hard to push away, surfacing with every breath. He glanced at Ben, who was staring at the grave, his expression a mixture of longing and sadness. "What do you talk to her about?" Jack asked gently. Ben shrugged, looking down at his hands. "Just stuff. School. How Grandpa gets mad at the TV when it doesn't work. How Grandma cries sometimes when she thinks I'm not looking." He hesitated, then added quietly, "How I miss her. How I wish she'd come back." Jack's throat tightened. "I wish she could too, Ben, but she's still with you in a way." Ben frowned. "How?" Jack thought for a moment, searching for the right words. "Well, when you remember her, when you talk to her, think about her, you're keeping her alive. In here." He tapped his chest lightly. "In your heart." Ben looked skeptical, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That sounds like something grown-ups say to make kids feel better." Jack chuckled softly. Yeah, it does. But it's true. I still remember my wife, her smile, the way she used to laugh at my terrible jokes. That's what I hold on to. That's what keeps her close, even though she's gone. Ben was quiet for a long time, his gaze distant. I don't want to forget her, he said finally, his voice trembling. What if I forget what she looked like, or what her voice sounded like? You won't, Jack said firmly. You won't forget. And even if some things get fuzzy, that doesn't mean she's gone. You'll always have her with you. Ben nodded, but his face was still troubled. I don't want to be alone. Jack's heart clenched. You're not alone, Ben. You've got your grandparents, and you've got me, okay? I'm here for you. Ben looked at him, his eyes searching Jack's face. But you're not my family. Jack swallowed hard. Maybe not, but I care about you, and I'm not going anywhere. Ben didn't say anything, just looked back at the grave, his shoulders slumping. Jack watched him, feeling helpless. He wanted to take the pain away, to make everything better, but he knew he couldn't. All he could do was be there. Can I ask you something? Ben said suddenly, his voice small. Of course, Jack replied. Do you think she's mad at me? Jack blinked, startled. Mad at you? Why would she be mad at you, Ben? Ben's face crumpled, tears welling in his eyes. Because I didn't do anything. I didn't help her. I just sat there in the car and cried. I didn't do anything. Jack felt a surge of anger. Anger that this little boy was carrying such a heavy burden, blaming himself for something that wasn't his fault. He reached out, gently placing a hand on Ben's shoulder. Ben, listen to me, he said softly but firmly. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. You were just a kid. There was nothing you could have done. And your mom, she wouldn't want you to think like that. She loved you. Ben sniffled, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. But I should have done something. No, Jack said, shaking his head. You did the best you could, just like she did. And she would want you to remember the good times, not blame yourself for something that wasn't your fault. Ben stared at him, his eyes wide and wet with tears. Do you really think so? I know so, Jack said quietly. For a long moment, Ben just sat there, his small frame shaking with silent sobs. Jack moved closer, not sure if the boy would want comfort, but Ben leaned against him, his face buried in Jack's shoulder. Jack wrapped an arm around him, holding him close, his own eyes stinging with tears he hadn't shed in years. They stayed like that for a long time, the afternoon light fading around them, the cemetery quiet and still. Jack knew there were no easy answers, no magic words that could make the pain go away, but maybe, just maybe, being there was enough. After a while, Ben pulled back, his face red and blotchy, but calmer. Thanks, Officer Jack, he whispered. Anytime, Ben, Jack replied, his voice hoarse. Anytime. They sat together for a few more minutes, the silence comfortable now, the bond between them solidifying in the shared stillness. When the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows stretched long and dark, Jack stood and helped Ben to his feet. Come on, he said gently. I'll take you home. Ben nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve. Okay. They walked to the cruiser together, Ben's small hand slipping into Jack's without hesitation. As they drove, Jack glanced over at the boy, his heart heavy but hopeful. Maybe he couldn't take away Ben's pain. Maybe he couldn't fix everything that was broken. But he could be there. He could listen. He could care. And for now, that was enough. The next week, Jack found himself back at the Turner's house. He parked his cruiser and took a deep breath before getting out. The last visit had been tense, and he wasn't sure how he'd be received this time. But Ben's face kept appearing in his thoughts, those wide, serious eyes that seemed to be carrying too much weight for such a young boy. Jack walked up the creaky steps and knocked on the door. After a few moments, Eleanor answered. Her face softened when she saw him, but there was still a shadow of worry in her eyes. Officer Simmons, she greeted, her voice tentative. I didn't expect you back so soon. Jack offered a gentle smile. I just wanted to see how Ben's doing. Is he around? Eleanor nodded, stepping back to let him in. He's in his room, doing his homework. Would you like some coffee? That would be great. Thank you, Jack replied, following her into the small kitchen. He took a seat at the cluttered table, his eyes drifting over the stack of bills and half-read newspapers. He noticed a few drawings scattered among the papers, crayon sketches of superheroes and animals. Simple, but vivid. Ben's work, no doubt. Eleanor busied herself with the coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she filled the pot. Ben's he's been talking a bit more. I think it's because of you. He told me about your visits to the cemetery. Jack nodded. He's a good kid, a tough kid. But I can see he's struggling. Eleanor sighed, setting 2 mugs on the table. He is. I'm so worried about him. He doesn't sleep well, and when he does, he wakes up crying for her. Her voice broke, and she turned away, wiping at her eyes. I just don't know what to do anymore. Jack reached out, his hand hovering over hers for a moment before he pulled it back. I want to help Mrs. Turner. There are programs, support groups that might be good for him, and for you and Mr. Turner, too. Eleanor glanced over her shoulder, her eyes wary. Frank won't like that. He thinks we should handle this ourselves. Family taking care of family, he says. I understand that, Jack said carefully. But sometimes, even family needs help. It doesn't mean you're failing, just that you're doing what's best for Ben. Before Eleanor could respond, they heard the front door slam. Jack turned to see Frank standing in the doorway, his face flushed, eyes narrowed with anger. What's this? Frank growled, glaring at Jack. I told you we don't need your help, officer. Jack stood, his posture calm but firm. Mr. Turner, I'm not here to interfere. I just want to make sure Ben's okay. He's fine, Frank snapped, his voice rising. He's our grandson. We're taking care of him. Frank, please, Eleanor said softly, but he waved her off, his gaze locked on Jack. You think we're not doing enough, don't you? Frank continued, his voice trembling with barely restrained anger. You think just because we're old we can't take care of him? That's not what I'm saying, Jack replied evenly. I know you're doing everything you can, but he needs more. He needs to talk to someone who can help him deal with what he's going through. We're his family, Frank shouted, his fists clenched. It's our job to help him, not yours. Jack took a step closer, his voice calm but firm. I'm not trying to take your place, Mr. Turner. I just want to be there for him. He's going through something no child should have to face. And it's not a sign of weakness to accept help. Frank's face twisted with anger, his voice breaking. You don't understand, officer. You have no idea what it's like to watch your daughter die, to have your grandson look at you with those eyes and know you're not enough. You think a few visits and some nice words will fix everything? Jack's heart ached at the pain in Frank's voice. I'm just trying to help, Frank. That's all. Frank shook his head, his shoulders slumping. Help? How can you help? Can you bring her back? Can you make him stop crying at night, can you? No, Jack said quietly. I can't do any of that, but I can be there for him. I can be someone he talks to. Someone who listens. Frank's jaw tightened, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He turned away, his voice low and broken. He's all we have left. I can't lose him too. You're not going to lose him, Jack said softly. But pushing people away, keeping him isolated, it's not going to make things better. For him, or for you. There was a long, heavy silence. Eleanor stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her husband's arm. Frank, please. We have to think about what's best for Ben. Frank looked at her, his face crumpling. I just want to protect him, Ellie. I want to protect him from all this hurt. I know, Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion. But we can't do it alone. Frank's shoulders sagged and he let out a long, shuddering breath. He turned back to Jack, his expression weary and defeated. What do you want us to do, officer? Jack took a deep breath, feeling a small flicker of hope. There are support groups for grieving families. Counseling for kids who've lost a parent. I can get you connected with people who understand what Ben's going through. Who can help him? Help all of you. Cope with this. Frank nodded slowly, the fight draining out of him. Okay, he murmured. Okay. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and she squeezed Frank's hand. Thank you, she whispered to Jack. Thank you for not giving up on him. Jack nodded, his own throat tightening. I'm not going anywhere, Mrs. Turner. Ben means a lot to me. Just then, Ben appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide with confusion. What's going on? Eleanor quickly wiped her eyes, forcing a smile. It's okay, sweetheart. We're just talking. Ben looked at Jack, his brow furrowed. Are you leaving? Jack shook his head, smiling. No, I'm not leaving. I just wanted to see how you were doing. Ben hesitated, then walked over to Jack, his small hand reaching out to tug on his sleeve. Can we go to the cemetery again? Just for a little while? Jack glanced at Frank and Eleanor, who both nodded. Sure, Ben, he said softly. We can go. As they left the house and walked to the car, Jack felt a strange mixture of relief and responsibility. He knew there was still a long road ahead. Healing wasn't going to happen overnight, but at least the door was open now, the first steps taken. He glanced down at Ben, who was watching the ground as they walked. Hey, kiddo, you know I'm here for you, right? Ben nodded, his voice quiet. Yeah, I know. Jack ruffled his hair gently, his heart swelling with a fierce protectiveness. Good. Because I'm not going anywhere. They drove in silence, the air between them filled with a kind of fragile hope. Jack knew there would be more challenges, more difficult conversations, more nights spent worrying about Ben and his future. But for now, this was enough. When they reached the cemetery, Ben walked ahead, his steps sure and steady. Jack followed, watching as Ben knelt by his mother's grave, his face softening as he spoke quietly, the words lost in the breeze. Jack stood back, giving him space, his own thoughts drifting to the past. He thought of his wife, their dreams, the life they were supposed to have. The pain was still there, sharp and unyielding, but it didn't consume him like it used to. Maybe, he thought, watching Ben's small form silhouetted against the darkening sky, they could both find a way through this. Maybe they could both learn to live with the loss, to carry it without letting it crush them. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill his lungs. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He was going to be there for Ben, no matter what. Because sometimes, that was all you could do. Be there, be present, and hope that, somehow, it would be enough. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when Jack got the call from Eleanor. He was finishing up paperwork at the station when his phone buzzed. The panic in her voice was palpable, cutting through the usual noise of the precinct. "Officer Simmons, it's Ben. He's gone. We can't find him anywhere." Eleanor's voice trembled, each word edged with fear. Jack's heart dropped. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "What do you mean he's gone? When did you last see him?" "After school," Eleanor sobbed. "He came home like usual. But then he went up to his room, and the next thing we knew, he was gone. His backpack is missing, and he didn't say anything. Frank went out looking, but it's getting dark, and I don't know where else to look." Jack's mind raced. "I'm on my way, Mrs. Turner. Stay at home in case he comes back, okay? I'll find him." He hung up, his pulse pounding as he grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Sergeant Perez caught his eye as he passed. "Everything okay?" "No," Jack replied, his voice tight. "A kid's missing. I need to go." "Do you need backup?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "No, I've got this," Jack said, already heading for the exit. He knew where Ben would be. He had to be right. The rain was coming down hard as Jack drove through the darkening streets, the wipers struggling to keep up. His thoughts were a blur. Images of Ben's solemn face, his small hands clutching his backpack, his quiet voice saying, "I don't want to be alone." When he reached the Turners' neighborhood, he barely slowed down, his eyes scanning the streets, looking for any sign of the boy. He saw Eleanor standing on the front porch, wringing her hands, her face pale and drawn. Jack waved briefly but didn't stop. He had to find Ben. He drove through the streets around the house, his anxiety mounting with each empty block. Then, suddenly, it hit him. The place Ben always felt close to his mother. He swung the cruiser around and sped toward the cemetery, his heart pounding in his ears. The rain fell in sheets now, the road slick and shining under the streetlights. He could barely see, but he pushed the car faster, his only thought on getting to Ben. As he neared the cemetery, his headlights caught a small, hunched figure sitting at the entrance, soaked through and shivering. Jack's chest tightened as he pulled over and jumped out, running toward the boy. "Ben!" he called out, his voice cutting through the rain. "Ben! It's me! Jack!" Ben looked up, his face pale and streaked with rain and tears. He stood slowly, his shoulders slumped, his backpack hanging limply from one hand. Jack reached him in a few strides, kneeling down to look him in the eyes. Hey, it's okay," Jack said softly, his voice trembling. "What are you doing out here, buddy? Everyone's worried sick." "I'm sorry," Ben whispered, his voice small and broken. "I didn't mean to make everyone worry. I didn't know where else to go." Jack's heart ached at the helplessness in the boy's voice. He placed a gentle hand on Ben's shoulder, feeling the cold, wet fabric beneath his palm. "It's okay, Ben. You're safe now. But you shouldn't be out here alone. Why did you leave?" Ben looked down, his face crumpling. "I heard Grandma and Grandpa talking. They were saying they can't take care of me anymore. They said they don't know what to do. I thought they didn't want me." Jack felt a surge of anger, not at Eleanor or Frank, but at the situation that had pushed them all to this breaking point. "Ben, that's not true. They love you. They're just worried, that's all. They're scared because they want to do what's best for you, but they don't know how. That doesn't mean they don't want you." Ben sniffled, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "But I'm too much trouble. I make everyone sad." "No, you don't," Jack said firmly. "You're not trouble, Ben. You're just a kid who's been through a lot. Your grandparents love you. They're just afraid of losing you. And running away, coming here alone, it only makes them more scared." Tears spilled down Ben's cheeks, mixing with the rain. "I just wanted to be with Mom. I thought if I came here, I'd feel better, but I just feel more alone." Jack swallowed hard, his own eyes stinging. He reached out and pulled Ben into a tight hug, feeling the boy's thin, cold body shivering against him. "I know, buddy. I know it hurts, but you're not alone. You've got your grandparents. You've got me. We're all here for you." For a moment, Ben stayed stiff in his arms. Then he melted, his small hands clutching at Jack's jacket, his sobs muffled against Jack's shoulder. Jack held him, his own tears mingling with the rain, feeling the boy's pain like a weight in his chest. They stayed like that for what felt like forever, the rain pouring down around them, the world outside the cemetery fading away. Finally, Ben pulled back, his face blotchy and red but his eyes a little clearer. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. Jack shook his head. "You don't have to be sorry, Ben. You're allowed to feel sad. You're allowed to be angry, but you don't have to go through this alone. We're here for you." Always. Ben nodded, his lower lip trembling. Will you come with me to tell Grandma and Grandpa? I don't want them to be mad. They're not mad, Ben, Jack said gently. They're just worried. And yes, I'll go with you. We'll talk to them together, okay? Okay, Ben whispered, his voice barely audible. Jack stood and held out his hand. Ben took it, his grip small, but strong. They walked back to the cruiser together, the rain easing as they reached the car. Jack helped Ben into the passenger seat, then climbed in himself, starting the engine and turning up the heat. As they drove back to the Turner's house, Jack kept glancing over at Ben, making sure he was really there, really okay. He'd been so scared when he got that call, terrified of finding an empty graveyard and no sign of the boy. But Ben was here, safe, and that was all that mattered. When they pulled up to the house, Eleanor was waiting on the porch, her face drawn with worry. She rushed down the steps as soon as she saw them, her arms wrapping around Ben as soon as he stepped out of the car. "Oh, Ben, sweetheart, you scared me so much," she cried, holding him tight. "Don't ever do that again, please." "I'm sorry, Grandma," Ben murmured, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I didn't mean to." Frank appeared in the doorway, his face stern, but his eyes softening as he saw Ben safe in Eleanor's arms. He walked down the steps slowly, his gaze meeting Jack's over the boy's head. "Thank you," Frank said gruffly, his voice thick. "Thank you for bringing him home." Jack nodded. "He was scared, Frank. He thought you didn't want him." Frank's face crumpled, and he reached out, placing a heavy hand on Ben's shoulder. "Ben, listen to me," he said, his voice shaking. "We love you. We're scared, too. We don't know how to help you, and that makes us feel like we're failing you. But we're not going anywhere. You hear me? You're our grandson, and we're not giving up on you." Ben looked up at his grandfather, his eyes wide and vulnerable. "I thought you were going to send me away." "No, son," Frank said softly, his hand trembling. "We'd never send you away. We just want what's best for you, and we don't always know what that is, but we're going to figure it out, together." Jack watched as Ben leaned into his grandfather's embrace, the tension in the boy's shoulders easing a little. Eleanor kept her arms around him, her eyes brimming with tears of relief. Jack stepped back, feeling like an outsider in this moment of family, but a part of him warmed at the sight. They still had a long road ahead, but at least now they were on it together. "I'll give you some space," Jack said quietly, "but if you need anything at all, just call me, okay?" Eleanor looked up, her face full of gratitude. "Thank you, Officer Simmons, for everything." Jack nodded, his chest tight. "Take care of each other." As he turned to leave, Ben's voice stopped him. "Officer Jack?" Jack turned back, his hand on the car door. "Yeah, Ben." Ben's face was serious, but there was a spark of hope in his eyes. "Can you come by tomorrow?" I'd like that." Jack smiled, a genuine, warm smile that he hadn't felt in a long time. "I'd like that too, Ben. I'll be here." He got into his car and drove away, the rain finally stopping as he pulled onto the main road. He felt a strange, quiet peace settle over him. Tonight had been hard, but they'd gotten through it, together. As he glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw the Turners standing on the porch, Ben in the middle, holding tightly to his grandparents' hands. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt a flicker of something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Hope. Jack pulled up to the cemetery entrance, the headlights of his cruiser piercing through the misty darkness. It had been a week since Ben had run away, and things seemed to have calmed down since then. Jack had been visiting the Turners almost daily, trying to help in any way he could, taking Ben to the park, talking with Eleanor and Frank about resources and support. It wasn't much, but it was something. But it was. Tonight, though, Ben had asked to come back to the cemetery, and Jack hadn't had the heart to say no. He knew the boy needed this, needed to feel close to his mother, even if it hurt. They stepped out of the car, the chill of the evening air wrapping around them. Ben clutched his small bouquet of wildflowers tightly, his face set in that same determined, solemn expression Jack had come to recognize. The cemetery was quiet, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath their feet as they walked toward Sarah's grave. When they reached it, Ben knelt down, gently laying the flowers on the grave. Jack stayed back, giving him space, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket as he watched the boy. "Hi, Mom," Ben whispered, his voice barely carrying in the stillness. "It's me, Ben. I brought you some flowers. I hope you like them." Jack's heart ached at the simplicity of the words, the raw, childlike hope that somehow, somewhere, his mother could hear him. "I had a rough week," Ben continued, his voice trembling slightly. I ran away. I thought Grandma and Grandpa didn't want me. I thought I was making things too hard for everyone." Jack swallowed, his throat tight as he watched Ben's small shoulders shake. He wanted to go to him, to pull him into his arms and tell him it wasn't his fault, that he was loved and wanted. But he knew this moment wasn't for him. It was for Ben and the mother he still longed to see. "I'm sorry, Mom," Ben whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I just wanted to see you. I wanted to feel like you were still here, but I just feel so alone." Jack couldn't stay back any longer. He took a few steps forward, kneeling beside Ben and placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone, Ben. I'm here, and your grandparents are here. We all love you, buddy." Ben looked up at him, his face streaked with tears. "But I still miss her. I miss her so much, and I don't know what to do." Jack's own eyes stung as he nodded, his voice gentle but firm. "It's okay to miss her, Ben. It's okay to feel sad and angry and confused, but you don't have to go through it alone. We're all here to help you, okay?" Ben sniffled, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Do you think she knows? Do you think she knows how much I miss her?" Jack hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, Ben, I think she knows. I think she knows how much you love her, and I think she's proud of you." "Proud of me?" Ben echoed, his voice small and filled with disbelief. "But I didn't do anything. I couldn't help her." Jack's heart broke at the guilt and self-blame in Ben's voice. He shifted closer, his hand tightening on Ben's shoulder. "You were just a little kid, Ben. There was nothing you could do. It wasn't your fault, and your mom would never, ever blame you for what happened. She loved you more than anything." Ben stared at the grave, his small hand reaching out to touch the cool stone. "I just wish I could tell her that I'm sorry, that I'm trying to be good." Jack's chest tightened as he watched the boy struggle with his emotions. He thought of all the things he wished he could say to his own wife, all the regrets and what-ifs that still haunted him, but he knew he couldn't let Ben carry that kind of weight. "Ben," he said softly, "your mom loved you for who you are, not for what you did or didn't do. And she wouldn't want you to feel like you have to be perfect. She just wants you to be happy, to remember the good times." Ben's tears flowed freely now, his shoulders shaking with sobs he could no longer hold back. Jack pulled him into his arms, holding him close as the boy cried, his small body trembling with the force of his grief. Jack held him, his own eyes wet, whispering soothing words, though he knew there was no comfort big enough to take away the pain. He just wanted Ben to know he wasn't alone, that he was loved and safe, even in the midst of all this hurt. After a long while, Ben's sobs quieted, and he leaned back, wiping his face with his sleeve. He looked up at Jack, his eyes red and tired, but there was a small spark of something else there, something that looked a little like hope. "Thanks, Officer Jack," he whispered, "for being here." Jack smiled, his voice thick. "I'm always going to be here, Ben. No matter what." Ben nodded, his small hand slipping into Jack's. They sat there for a while longer, the night deepening around them, the cemetery still and peaceful. Jack didn't rush him, didn't push him to talk or move. He just sat, their hands clasped together, the connection between them strong and steady. Finally, Ben let out a long, shaky breath. "I think I'm ready to go now." Jack nodded, standing and helping Ben to his feet. "Okay, buddy. Let's get you home." They walked back to the car, Jack's arm draped protectively over Ben's shoulders. As they drove back to the Turner's house, Ben was quiet, his head resting against the window, his eyes half closed. Jack glanced at him, his heart full of love and concern for this brave, broken little boy. When they pulled up to the house, Eleanor and Frank were waiting on the porch, their faces tight with worry. Ben hesitated, then climbed out of the car, his steps slow but steady as he approached them. "I'm okay, Grandma," he said softly, looking up at her. "I just needed to talk to Mom." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she pulled him into her arms, holding him close. "I know, sweetheart, I know." Frank stepped forward, his hand resting gently on Ben's back. "We're here for you, Ben. We're always going to be here for you." Ben nodded, his small frame relaxing a little in their embrace. Jack watched, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and pride. This was what Ben needed, a family that loved him, that held him close even when things were hard. After a moment, Eleanor looked up at Jack, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Officer Simmons, for everything." Jack shook his head, smiling. "I didn't do much. You two are the ones holding everything together." Frank's gruff voice broke in. "No, you did plenty. You're part of this now, whether you like it or not." Jack felt a warmth spread through him at those words. He nodded, his voice soft. "I'm glad to be part of it." He watched as they all went inside, Ben's hand clasped tightly in Eleanor's, Frank's arm around his grandson's shoulders. Jack stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the quiet murmur of their voices, the low, steady hum of a family beginning to heal. As he turned to leave, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let Ben go through this alone. Jack got back into his cruiser and drove away, the night air crisp and cool, the stars shining brightly above. He had no doubt that there would be more hard days ahead. Grief wasn't something that disappeared overnight, but they were making progress, step by step, moment by moment. And as he drove through the quiet streets, His thoughts on the boy and the family he was beginning to care about more than he'd thought possible. Jack felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. For Ben. For himself. For all of them. The decision had been brewing in Jack's mind for weeks, but it wasn't until he found himself sitting across from Sergeant Perez that it truly felt real. Her office was small and cluttered, the walls covered in old case files and commendations. She looked up at him, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "You wanted to talk?" she asked, leaning back in her chair. Jack nodded, his throat dry. "Yeah, I need to take a leave of absence." Perez blinked, clearly caught off guard. "A leave? Jack, you've never taken more than a day off in all the years I've known you. What's going on?" Jack took a deep breath, his fingers gripping the edge of the chair. He hadn't really talked about it with anyone other than Ben's grandparents, and even then, it had been tentative, uncertain. But now, with Perez watching him, waiting for an explanation, he knew he had to lay it all out. "There's this kid," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Ben, he lost his mom a couple of months ago. I've been checking in on him and his grandparents, helping out where I can, but it's not enough. They need more support than I can give them while I'm still on the job." Perez raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about the Turner kid, right? The one you brought in that night he ran away?" "Yeah," Jack said quietly. "That's him." She nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "And you think taking time off is going to help?" Jack hesitated, then nodded firmly. "I know it will. They're struggling, Lisa. His grandparents are doing their best, but they're old, and Ben needs someone who can be there for him consistently. I've been spending time with them, helping set up a support network, but it's not enough. I can't be half in, half out." "And what happens when your leave is up?" Perez asked, her tone gentle but pointed. "You can't stay on leave forever, Jack." Jack looked down at his hands, the weight of the decision heavy in his chest. "I know, but right now, they need me more than the department does. I'm thinking about petitioning for guardianship." Perez's eyes widened, and she leaned forward, her voice dropping. "You're serious about this?" "As serious as I've ever been," Jack replied, his voice steady. "He needs someone, and I can be that someone." Perez was silent for a long moment, her gaze searching his face. Finally, she let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging slightly. "You know, Jack, I've watched you throw yourself into your work for years. After what happened with your wife and the baby, I was worried you'd never find a way out of that dark place." Jack's chest tightened at the mention of his past, but he forced himself to stay focused. "This isn't about me, Lisa. It's about Ben. He's a good kid. He deserves a chance." "I know it's about him," Perez said softly, "but it's about you too. You're not just doing this for him, are you?" Jack met her gaze, the truth clear in his eyes. "No, I'm doing it for both of us. I can't keep burying myself in this job, pretending I'm fine. I need to do something that matters." Perez nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You always did have a soft spot for the lost causes." "Yeah, well, this one's worth it," Jack said, his voice softening. "I've already filed the paperwork. I just need your okay." Perez sighed, rubbing her forehead. "I'll sign off on it, Jack, but you'd better come back when you're ready. We need you here." Jack nodded, a wave of relief washing over him. "Thank you, Lisa." She stood, offering him her hand. "Take care of yourself, Jack. And take care of that kid." "I will," he promised, shaking her hand firmly. "I will." As he left her office, the weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. This was the right decision. It had to be. Jack spent the next few days getting his affairs in order. He met with Eleanor and Frank, explaining his plan in more detail. They were hesitant at first, especially Frank, but eventually they agreed. They knew they needed help, and Jack's offer was the best option they had. The next step was setting up a support network. Jack reached out to local organizations that offered grief counseling and family support. He arranged for a counselor to visit the house once a week to work with Ben and his grandparents, and he set up meetings with social workers who could provide additional resources. It was a whirlwind of phone calls, meetings, and paperwork, but it was worth it. Each step felt like progress, like he was finally doing something tangible to help Ben and his family. One evening, after another long day of coordinating with various agencies, Jack sat with Ben on the porch of the Turner's house. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the yard. Ben was quiet, his face thoughtful as he kicked his feet against the porch steps. "You've been busy," Ben said finally, his voice soft. "Yeah," Jack agreed, smiling a little. "I guess I have." Ben looked up at him, his eyes wide and curious. "Are you really going to be here all the time now?" Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, Ben. I'm taking a break from work so I can spend more time with you and your grandparents. I want to help out, make things a little easier for all of you." Ben's face lit up with a small, hesitant smile. "That sounds nice." "It will be," Jack said gently. "We're going to figure this out together, okay?" "Okay," Ben whispered, his voice filled with a kind of fragile hope that made Jack's heart ache. A few days later, Jack found himself back in the Turners' living room, a stack of paperwork spread out on the coffee table. Eleanor and Frank sat across from him, their expressions a mixture of relief and anxiety. "This is just the preliminary stuff," Jack explained, sliding a few forms toward them. "It's not a permanent arrangement, just something to get the process started. We can take our time and figure out what's best for everyone." Eleanor nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Jack. I don't know how we'd manage without you." Frank cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "We're grateful, Simmons. More than you know. But are you sure about this? Taking leave from work, all this legal stuff, it's a big commitment." "I know," Jack said quietly, "and I'm ready for it. I've thought about this a lot, and I know it's what I want to do." Frank studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. We trust you." Jack felt a surge of relief and gratitude. "Thank you. I promise. I'm going to do everything I can to help." They signed the necessary forms, and Jack left that evening feeling lighter than he had in a long time. There was still a long road ahead, but he was ready for it. The next morning, Jack woke early, a sense of purpose and determination filling him. He had a meeting with a social worker later that day, and then he was taking Ben to his first counseling session. It was all happening so fast, but it felt right. When he arrived at the Turners' house, Ben was waiting on the porch, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked up as Jack approached, a small, shy smile on his face. "Ready to go?" Jack asked, his own smile widening. Ben nodded. "Yeah, I'm ready." As they drove to the counseling center, Jack glanced over at Ben, feeling a strange mix of pride and protectiveness. This kid had been through so much, but he was still standing, still fighting, and Jack was going to be right there beside him, every step of the way. When they reached the center, Jack walked in with Ben, his hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. They met with the counselor, a kind woman named Ms. Parker, who greeted Ben warmly and explained how things would work. Ben was nervous, fidgeting with the straps of his backpack, but Jack stayed close, offering quiet encouragement. He knew this was just the beginning, but it was an important step. Ben needed to know that it was okay to talk about his feelings, that it was okay to ask for help. After the session, Ben was quiet, but seemed more at ease. As they walked back to the car, Jack ruffled his hair gently. "How do you feel?" "Okay," Ben said, looking up at him. "She was nice. She said I can talk to her whenever I want." "That's good," Jack said softly. "I'm really proud of you, Ben. It's not easy to talk about this stuff." Ben nodded, a small, genuine smile appearing on his face. "I know, but I want to try." Jack's heart swelled with pride and love for the boy. "That's all that matters, buddy. Just keep trying." As they drove back to the Turners' house, Jack felt a sense of peace settle over him. He knew there would still be hard days, that the road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was doing something that mattered, and he wasn't doing it alone. They reached the house, and Ben jumped out of the car, running up the steps to where Eleanor and Frank were waiting. Jack followed, his heart full as he watched Ben hug his grandparents, his face bright and hopeful. Jack knew there was still a lot of work to be done, but he wasn't afraid. He was ready for whatever came next, because now they were a team, and together, they could handle anything. The sun was shining bright and warm, a perfect autumn day. Jack stood at the edge of the cemetery, watching as Ben carefully arranged flowers on his mother's grave. Today felt different, not like the heavy, grief-laden visits they'd had before, but more like a quiet tribute, a way to honor Sarah's memory without the crushing weight of sadness. Jack had taken Ben out of school early, with permission from his grandparents, for this special visit. It had been months since that stormy night when Ben ran away, and in that time, everything had changed. Jack's leave of absence had been extended, his petition for temporary guardianship approved, and they were all finding a new rhythm, a new normal. He still remembered the look on Frank's face the day the judge signed the papers. Relief, gratitude, and finally hope. It was a day that felt like a promise, a step toward a future that was a little brighter, a little less uncertain. "Do you think she'd like these?" Ben asked, his voice breaking Jack out of his thoughts. Jack stepped closer, looking down at the bouquet of sunflowers and daisies Ben had picked out himself. "I think she'd love them, Ben. They're beautiful." Ben smiled, a genuine, easy smile that had been rare in those first few weeks. She always liked flowers. She used to grow them in the garden. We'd pick them together and put them in a big vase on the kitchen table. Jack nodded, his heart warming at the image of Sarah and Ben, mother and son, in happier times. "That sounds like a good memory." Ben's eyes shone as he gently adjusted the flowers, his voice soft. "Yeah, it is." They stood there for a while longer, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant chirping of birds. Jack watched Ben, his small form silhouetted against the bright blue sky, and felt a deep sense of peace. This place, once a symbol of grief and loss, had become something else, a place of connection, of healing. After a while, Ben turned to him, his expression thoughtful. "Can we come here together sometimes? Just to talk?" Jack smiled, feeling a lump form in his throat. "Of course, Ben. Anytime you want." Ben nodded, satisfied, and reached out to take Jack's hand. They walked back to the car, the weight of the past few months lifting just a little more with each step. Back at the house, Eleanor was bustling around the kitchen, preparing lunch. Jack could hear the clatter of pots and pans, the faint sound of Frank's voice coming from the living room where he was watching the afternoon news. It was a scene that had become comfortingly familiar over the past months. Ben ran inside, heading straight to the kitchen. "Grandma, I put the flowers on Mom's grave. I think she'd really like them." Eleanor turned, her face lighting up as she saw him. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm sure she'd love them. You've always had such a good eye for flowers." Ben beamed, his eyes shining. "Jack said we can go visit her together whenever I want." Eleanor glanced over at Jack, her eyes soft with gratitude. "That's wonderful, honey." Jack stepped into the kitchen, leaning against the doorframe. "How can I help?" Eleanor waved him off with a smile. "Oh, don't worry about a thing. Just sit down. Lunch will be ready in a minute." Jack chuckled and moved to the table, watching as Ben chattered happily about his day at school and the new friends he'd made. It was still amazing to him how much progress the boy had made in such a short time. There were still hard days, still nights when the grief came crashing back, but they were fewer now, and Ben was learning to let others in, to lean on them when he needed to. The front door creaked open and Frank shuffled in, his gaze moving around the room before settling on Jack. "You're just in time," he said gruffly, but there was a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Looks like I timed it right," Jack replied with a grin. Frank took his usual seat at the table, his movements slow but steady. Jack noticed the way his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the newspaper on the table. Frank's health had been a concern, and it was one of the reasons Jack had pushed so hard to be there for them. But he seemed stronger these days, more at ease. "So what's the plan for today?" Frank asked, glancing at Ben, who was now helping Eleanor set the table. "I was thinking we could go to the park later," Jack suggested. "Maybe play some catch, if you're up for it." Ben's eyes lit up. "Can we, Grandpa? Please?" Frank smiled, his face softening. "I think I can manage that." Jack watched the exchange, his heart full. These moments, simple as they were, felt like small miracles. A year ago, he never would have imagined himself sitting here, part of this family, helping them navigate their grief and find their way back to each other. But now, he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. After lunch, they headed to the park, the sun warm on their faces as they strolled down the tree-lined paths. Jack and Ben tossed a baseball back and forth, while Eleanor and Frank sat on a bench nearby, chatting quietly. Ben was laughing, his cheeks flushed with exertion, his eyes bright. Jack felt a surge of joy watching him, the kind of pure, uncomplicated happiness that had been so rare for both of them. "You're getting good at this," Jack teased as Ben caught the ball effortlessly. Ben grinned, tossing it back. "Maybe I'll be a baseball player when I grow up." "Yeah? I think you'd be great at that," Jack said, his voice warm. "You can be anything you want to be, Ben." Ben's smile faltered a little, and he looked down at the ball in his hands. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," Jack said firmly, walking over to kneel in front of him. "You're smart and you're brave, and you've got a good heart. You can do anything you set your mind to." Ben looked up at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "I want to make Mom proud." Jack's throat tightened, and he placed a hand on Ben's shoulder, his voice soft. "She's already proud of you, Ben. I know she is." Ben nodded, his smile returning, and Jack felt his own heart lift in response. They continued playing, the sound of their laughter mingling with the breeze, and for a while, everything felt light and easy, like the weight they'd all been carrying had finally started to lift. That evening, after they'd returned home and Ben was tucked into bed, Jack sat on the porch with Eleanor and Frank, the night air cool and refreshing. The stars were bright above them, the sky clear and endless. "Thank you, Jack," Eleanor said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. "For everything you've done for Ben, for us." Jack shook his head, his voice steady. "You don't have to thank me, Eleanor. I'm the one who's grateful. Being here, being part of this family, it's given me a purpose I didn't know I needed." Frank cleared his throat, his voice gruff but warm. "You're a good man, Simmons. You've given Ben something we couldn't. Hope, a future. We'll never be able to repay you for that." Jack looked at them, his heart full. "You don't owe me anything. I'm just glad I could help." They sat in silence for a while, the night settling around them, a sense of peace and contentment filling the air. Jack knew there were still challenges ahead, still moments of grief and uncertainty, but he also knew they would face them together. As he looked out at the darkened yard, the sound of crickets filling the air, Jack felt a sense of calm he hadn't known in years. He'd spent so long running from his own pain, burying himself in his work, afraid to let anyone in. But Ben had changed all that. This little boy, with his big heart and his quiet strength, had helped Jack find his way back to the living. They were healing, all of them, in their own ways, and that was enough. The next morning, they all gathered at the breakfast table, the sunlight streaming through the windows, filling the room with warmth. Ben was talking excitedly about his plans for the day, his face glowing with enthusiasm. Jack listened, smiling, his heart swelling with love and pride for this resilient, incredible boy. As they ate, Jack looked around the table, at Eleanor's gentle smile, Frank's steady presence, Ben's radiant joy, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. They were a family now, bound not by blood, but by something deeper, something forged in the fires of loss and struggle, and the determination to keep moving forward, no matter what. They finished breakfast, and Jack helped Ben get ready for school, making sure his backpack was packed and his lunch was in order. As they walked to the front door, Ben turned to him, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Are you going to pick me up after school, Jack?" "Of course, buddy," Jack said, smiling down at him. "I wouldn't miss it." Ben nodded, then did something that took Jack completely by surprise. He stepped forward and hugged him tightly, his small arms wrapping around Jack's waist. "I'm glad you're here," Ben whispered. Jack's throat tightened, and he gently hugged him back, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm glad I'm here too, Ben." As Ben headed off to school, his steps light and confident, Jack watched him go, his heart full to bursting. This was what he'd been searching for, what he'd been missing all those years, a reason to hope, a reason to keep going, a family. And as he stood there watching Ben's figure disappear down the street, Jack knew he was exactly where he was meant to be, no longer running, no longer hiding. Just here now, with these people he loved, ready to face whatever came next, together.